You ready?
Yeah.
All right, we'll call the meeting to order. The first item on the agenda would be the approval of last meeting, the minutes. Does anybody have any changes or comments on the minutes from last meeting?
Mr. Chair, let me just remind everybody, we are televising this, so we are recording it, so please speak clearly and into the microphone.
Kirk, can you hear us okay? All right. So does anybody have any? There you go. There. Any changes or anything that's omitted or needs to be changed in the minutes?
I did not have any changes.
Okay. So
I recommend that we approve the minutes as written.
I second.
moved and seconded, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Unanimous. All right. Next is the draft and policy changes for the minimum standards with the parachute procedures.
So, if you remember, on October 4th, we brought the draft policies and procedures for skydiving and parachute operations to the board for review. We accepted public comment. We had a number of public comments. We went ahead and the board decided to send it back to the subcommittee to review those comments and make any changes or revisions or recommendations back to the board. We did go ahead and send the, actually we provided the link to the video to our legal counsel, who reviewed it thoroughly and gave us a point-by-point description of his interpretation of what was said and his responses. It is a document that is a attorney-client privilege document, so I cannot share the specifics with you. But what I can tell you is the conclusion that he came up with was that our draft policies and procedures are drafted in accordance with the FAA and USPA guidelines, and the policies do not provide for unauthorized exclusive rights to other airport users. With that, the subcommittee, after discussion, decided to return the draft policies and procedures to you as originally written with no changes. So tonight, your action would be to, if you want to have more discussion on these policies and procedures, that's fine. But what we're looking for is a motion to refer or recommend that these be adopted by the City Commission.
Okay. All right. Is there anything that the subcommittee would like to add?
No, the only thing that I did want to ask Chuck about is, I did notice that one error on that insurance table. Did the risk?
We got that corrected. Mhm.
Okay, all right.
Yes, and then I should also add, I have on several occasions sent these over to the FAA for review and comment. I have not received any comment back.
Do you have any public comment on this tonight? Anybody talking for the skydiving issue? Okay. So, with no public comment, is there anything the board has questions about, or the board members? No other comments, I'd say.
I would like to just get a motion on the
That's
table, and if somebody wants to comment on it down the road a piece or two, that's fine, but I think, we need to get something on the table that we can say aye, nay, or,
Okay,
let's go home.
so at that point, we'll take a motion, so I can motion to accept the revisions and the procedures as they are written, and recommend forwarding them to the City Commission for their approval.
And there was just that one edit of the original draft on that chart.
Yeah, that was
Is
just
that
on the
correct?
insurance requirements, and I think it was an omission that we just had to add.
It was just, was not really anything having to do with parachute operations, but in looking at the chart and the minimum standards as a minimum insurance requirements chart, and there was simply an error in there that needed to be corrected, so.
Okay.
I was just wondering if it might be more appropriate for somebody not on the subcommittee to make the motion.
Yes.
I so move.
Make the motion
Yes, I do.
to approve. Okay. Motion by Cheri Thompson, seconded. I'll second. Second by Dan Bourne. Okay, all in favor of moving these on, sending them to the commission for their approval? Say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Nay.
One?
Yep.
Okay.
We will plan to have this tentatively on the February 6th City Commission agenda. So the public knows.
What date?
February 6th.
Thank you.
All right. Next on the agenda is the request from KU Department of Aerospace Engineering to conduct unmanned aircraft systems activities at the airport.
And I'll go ahead and let Mark Ewing's here tonight. He's got a presentation he'd like to provide the board, and let him make his request.
Okay, good evening. I am from the University of Kansas. I represent our Flight Research Laboratory. The picture you see in the background is us operating type of aircraft we would like to operate at the airport, only that's in Greenland. The motivations for me coming to you to talk about the potential flight of UAS or UAVs, drones, whatever you want to call them, at the airport. I'll go over the proposed operations, give some arguments, top level, 30,000 feet arguments. I'll mention similar operations elsewhere, that is at other municipal airports, and then talk about potential next steps. We've been all over the Arctic and Antarctic, but we fly mostly at the Model Masters field. And we're very happy with that arrangement. But going to and from there, from our hangar out at the airport, is between 5 and 10 man hours per flight day. So I see it as wasted time. Also, you can get out there and the winds are out of limits and you have to go back home again. We have very limited facilities. Model Masters has been great to us, providing the shelter and some limited storage out there. But if we operated from the airport, it would obviously save us a lot of time. And we fly in the 20 to 30 days out of the year. Of course, there's ample facilities, so specifically the two hangars we have out there on the northwest side of the airport. There could be a motivation for the City of Lawrence. I can't speak for the City of Lawrence, but there have been some discussions that it could be a potential attraction for other UAS users, potential source of income, especially if it attracted a business in the UAS world. So our proposed operations will be fixed wing and rotary wing UAS flights from Lawrence Municipal Airport. And then to discuss the range of operations that I'd like you to consider, there's basically two variables: where we take off and land, and then where we would fly. So take off and land either from grass strips, west of the runways, or from the runways or taxiways. In the flight areas, two choices: one, not over the airport at all, and then one would involve actually flying over the airport. So plan A would be to take off and land on grass strips and then operate west of the runways over KU endowment property. So here's a Google Earth view of the two runways. There used to be a taxiway. You can see it in the relief. There was a taxiway from this west side of the airport out to this taxiway. Currently, it's actually torn up pretty badly by the heavy equipment out there putting in the wildlife fence. But up until a month ago, it was pretty level. It would still take some tender loving care to get it ready for aircraft operations. I'll mention this later, but you'll notice there's a line of trees along there. If we did, let's say, operate from a grass strip here, it would be desirable to have many, if not all, these trees taken down, which then reduces the bird population. And we've had trouble with that in our hangars. The other option is over here, the grass strip between the taxiway and the active runway 1533. Plan B would be to take off from paved runways and taxiways, but still operate, sorry, here this is the flight area we would propose to be flying in. So not crossing the county roads, operating in this area. Plan B would be to take off from the paved runways and taxiways and then operate west of the runways as before. So this box really should show it for Plan B. We go back to this picture, it would still be taking off from the runways or taxiways, then operating in this box. Plan C would be then to operate over just runway 19. Obviously, that would be something we might want to do. Let's say if this was the active runway, and then possibly then overfly the non-approach and departure segments of the airspace. Now you might wonder, well, this is crazy talk, but a lot of municipalities have encouraged and allowed UAS operators to operate at their airports. My argument is that this is probably the safest place to be under 400 feet over parts of the runway where you don't expect any traffic. But we always operate, when we operate at Model Masters, there's often some air traffic, specifically Huey helicopters that want to see what's going on over there, and they fly down the runway. So we've got a lot of experience with deconflicting with various observers. So our flight team includes a trained operator that we currently use, a K-State graduate. We're really happy with him. We have someone holding the brick for him. And then we have multiple operators also on bricks communicating to the ground station. So that's part of the argument. We have a long, safe history of flying small UAS in Antarctica, Greenland, and then the Model Masters field. We have sound manned aircraft deconfliction processes and a history of operations actually in control towers. When we flew into Greenland in 2016, we were in constant contact with the Kangerlussuaq International Airport on the order of 30 flights, international flights a day. We have the ability, by the way, we fly always with the pilot in command is a trained pilot. Then when the aircraft does what we go to these Arctic areas for, namely flying straight flight lines over glaciers to determine the depth of the glaciers using radar, we're always then under autonomous flight. But the pilot, in the proposal that I'm presenting here today, all three plans, would be in constant visual contact with the aircraft and be able to deconflict by immediately taking over the aircraft and getting out of the way of any traffic. We also have the ability to, for the ground station operator who might have, let's say, a different view of the airspace, could, with a punch of a button, send the aircraft to various deconflicted home points to orbit, waiting for traffic to clear. And at any point in the three plans that I've proposed, we could return to the landing within 2 minutes of any notification of traffic in the area. And we could go to home point within 1 minute. So we're in pretty close in, all mostly under half a nautical mile. As I said, there are similar operations elsewhere, and I've got a number of Part 107 waivers that I brought with me, and a series of agreements between Indiana State and the North Vernon Municipal Airport, presumably in Indiana. It's sort of interesting, a number of the certificate of authorizations for waiver that I've found online just say that they'll operate in the vicinity of the airport and they put a circle around the airport, but don't actually say the words that they would take off or land. But they do specifically cite this in the agreement between the state and the North Vernon Municipal Airport. But these are the flights that I've found with explicit discussion of flying from the airfield are based on a good agreement with the city. In other words, the city's got to agree, or the owner of the airport. So the next steps, if there were next steps, assuming that the city, the fixed base operator, others, the advisory board obviously, would be to seek FAA approval of a certificate of authorization, so it's a waiver. We currently have a blanket COA to fly in Class G airspace anywhere in the state of Kansas. But we've had in the past very specific COAs for very specific flights with aircraft well over 55 pounds. The FAA would then be able to give us a go, no-go within 90 days. If we were, let's say, my ship came in and we were able to fly off the airport even on the grass strip, the grass strip would have to be taken care of to take care of the damage, the current damage, level it with granulated soil. I use the word granulated because I couldn't think of the actual word. It's not dirt clods, but there's a better word for it. Then seed it with fine grass and roll it in the spring. And as I said before, we would be interested in having many of the trees along Mud Creek, that's the little creek that you see to the west of the airport, removed. And that's the extent of my presentation.
You just have questions for Martin? Well, I guess my biggest question is, I don't think it makes a difference as far as the safety of the airport, whether you're taking off of grass or the asphalt. If you're taking off in the airport environment, it's the airport environment, so I think that's critical. And I think having the FAA guidelines on that safe operation would be pretty crucial. If you have a pilot in command that's on the ground that is wearing a headset and communication, so he's actually communicating with any traffic that's in the area, so that could be avoided, especially, commercial traffic coming in, the big jets, or Lifestar if they're departing, to make sure that we don't conflict with their activities. I think that would be the biggest one. On the grass strip, we actually, since the city doesn't officially have a grass strip out there, we'd be creating one. So if we're calling it a grass strip, then we would have to get FAA approval to make that an official strip, which I don't know that we can do that with the approaches to the other runways. I think if we're using it or making a strip out there, it would be just solely for the purposes of your operation, because having it parallel to an existing runway, the 1019, would be critical. As far as the trees go, I know how the winds do. Anything coming out of the north can affect aircraft landing on 1019. So not just the bird activity, but the trees disrupting the wind flow could create some challenges for you as well. So if it comes up for that, are you asking the city to help eliminate those trees? I don't know, because I'm sure the city would have loved to gotten rid of some of those trees earlier on, because they've cleaned the brush out from underneath to mitigate a lot of the wildlife habitat out there. But I don't know, is that on city property, those trees?
It's not, and there was some issue with the fence even, because it is a navigable waterway.
Okay.
And there was some Corps and FEMA issues with that, so we moved the fence in a little bit to stay off of that side of that berm. So there would be those hurdles to jump as well if we decided to do something like
To
that.
try and follow that part of it,
That's an operational issue that the city and KU will have to
to work out down the
work
road.
out. I mean, I think so when Mark came to the city manager's office, they said we need to refer this back to the Aviation Advisory Board for the aviation use part of it. The agreement between the city and KU will be worked out pending, your approval, that the operation can be done. And obviously there'll have to be, the communications and the safety aspects and all that stuff will have to be all rolled into any agreement that we.
Yeah,
put
I'm
together.
concerned, Professor, about the creation of a dirt runway and what Rich has said here. that the FAA, moves ponderously slow. I mean, glaciers, appear to be Usain Bolt compared to them. With regard to creating a runway, even if we call it an ersatz runway for UAS only. I'm with Rich. I would rather have a proposal that talked about takeoffs and landings on existing taxiways or runways. And even on the taxiways, I think
Yeah, I think
we may run into, an FAA objection that would be one of those classic objections where they say no and walk out of the room and there's no further discussion.
Well, our pilots would like nothing better than to take off a 100-foot wide runway.
Well, I think that, as far as aviation safety goes, I think that would be the best for us. Unless you have an aircraft that specifically needs a grass strip, like something that's designed to land in the tundra that doesn't have the same gear that an aircraft using an improved runway would.
I would agree with that. I don't know that there's any benefit to spending the time to work on a grass strip that's parallel to 119, because you would never do simultaneous operations. So if you need a takeoff and landing strip, it might as well be the concrete.
Right. And the other thing,
I'm all for this.
Yeah, so,
the other thing,
I don't think he's arguing.
no, I agree. I would kind of eliminate that piece of it and that would eliminate the tree issue probably too, wouldn't it?
The issue is pilot keeping,
Line of sight.
well, if we're at the airport, we're far enough away that the trees would not be an issue.
Right. And you might be able to put some type of operations stand on top of that hangar and improve your line of sight dramatically. I have a couple of questions if I could follow up. You mentioned that this was part of work done by the Flight Research Laboratory. Is this activity that could occur at the airport going to be research or test flying?
It would be a combination of research and education.
Okay.
Like we use the Model Masters a lot for our flight test course, for our flight dynamics course, and most recently our introduction to aerospace engineering. We had 8 teams of students flying 8 small airplanes up there.
Okay. So the research or testing that's going on, does it have to do with the controllability of the aircraft, or is it something else? And here's what, I won't try and be vague intentionally. If we're testing the controllability of an aircraft and it fails the test, that's one concern I have. Where's that airplane going?
Right.
So I'd be interested in what you're testing or what you're researching.
Okay, most recently we have been testing autopilots, and of the last, on the 29th, 30th of November and the 1st of December, we flew multiple flights with a 55-pound airplane, and the autopilot failed multiple times. And the pilot took control of the aircraft. We went around again, tried with different initial states. Autopilots are often picky about what the initial state of the aircraft is. Mm-hmm. And we had a number of good flights and then took control and landed. But it's normal for us to have the autopilot fail because we're testing new autopilots that have capabilities that current autopilots don't have.
Okay.
But
So what's the delay in time between the failure of an autopilot system that's being tested and when that pilot can take control back and fly that airplane?
It's sub-second.
Okay.
Yeah, and when I say that it fails, what I mean by that, I'll just give you an example. The most recent invocation of the autopilot had too much gain assigned to the pitch rate, and so the aircraft got into an oscillation. And so we let it go for a little while, and the pilot said, okay, I got it. So he took it over again. We made some changes on the ground, flew it again, the oscillation was less, so we're going in the right direction, and then third time was a charm. So we are trying autopilots which are much more capable than current off-the-shelf autopilots. That's the research part of it.
So I think that is the level of detail that this board's going to need to render an opinion to the city on the safety aspect of it. I think you mentioned like 20 to 30 flights a year.
That's
Or
been.
maybe you said days.
Days.
Okay, so you might fly.
10 flights in a day.
Yes, but you've picked a day you're going to fly, and you might send a bird up 10 times on that day, but,
We're out there at dawn and leave at dusk.
okay.
Well, significantly after dusk.
So I think we need a little bit more detail. There were a number of questions that I wrote down. One would be, some more detail on what type of operations we're talking about, what the testing is, what your data to date has shown with regard to the capability of recovering that airplane. If it's out of control for 30 seconds, that's a lot different than we don't have control for 2 seconds or even less than a second before we retain control of the airplane and we can return it to the airport or whatever. I think those are important details for us with regard to safety. You mentioned, I think, one scenario in Indiana where there was a similar operation going on that you're interested in doing at Lawrence Municipal. Have you talked to those that are flying UASs and those that are looking after the safety at the airport to see how that is working, or is it just an example you've seen in COAs?
It's just an example I've seen, but that's certainly a direction we could go.
Right, and that might be something that we could do as a board, is go talk to those parties and see what their thoughts on how it's working. We have had other scenarios where, somebody says things worked great between a parachute operation and an airport, and then you go talk to them and you learn that it wasn't so great. So that would be something we'd want to look into, and you might as well. Let me just look at my list of questions that I wrote down real quick.
Regarding safety, if we're talking about these small aircraft, since, let's say, 2010, we've had 0 loss of aircraft, and there have been hundreds of times when the pilot has said, I got this airplane, takes it back away from the autopilot.
Okay. You mentioned a 55-pound airplane. Would that be the only type airplane that you'd be operating, something of that size and weight, or are there other things that would be in consideration?
I mentioned 55 because, as you know, Part 107 flights are limited under 55 unless you get a waiver.
Right.
But you can get a waiver to go higher.
Okay.
We would operate under a COA since we're a public entity, and we have such a COA, and it allows us to fly up to 85-pound aircraft. That's about the limit. That's the heaviest aircraft we have.
Okay.
The original Croesus aircraft that you had, it was pretty good size.
It was
And-
1,100 pounds.
Yeah, I was going to say that we're not
talking.
talking about aircraft that large, because I know that when Andy was working on the smaller ones at the airport, they were significantly reduced in size. So we're not talking something that was basically the size of like a midget Mustang or some of the home-built aircraft. We're talking about smaller UAVs. The one thing, I guess, the safety aspect is what I was really interested in is you will have, this would be something to work out, but there'll be somebody on the ground that's familiar with airports, air traffic, that can be on a radio, so they're monitoring, and they can instruct, so make sure, because a 55-pound aircraft and a jet coming in, at 200 miles an hour, it's going to be tough to see that object. It'll be like seeing a vulture, but you don't see it till last minute, just to make sure where it is in the pattern and things like that. So that way, I guess the aircraft safety, just to make sure that stuff is
The key
taken
is
care
for
of.
us to see them, so they don't have to try to see us.
Exactly. It always works good if you both see each other, but that part I understand.
Well, I think you were getting to this. The communications are key. That person that's operating the UAS in the airport traffic area, or the person that's standing with them that is operating the radio, maybe they're working together on this. That person needs to be familiar with operations of an airplane in an airport traffic area with lingo and all those things. Because we need to talk like we're talking to another airplane.
But
It is another airplane.
I think he said that there would be a licensed pilot on the ground that would be considered pilot in command.
Yes.
So he would be in charge of the operation, even if one of the students is flying it at the time. There's somebody standing with him that he said would be a
I
licensed
think your
pilot.
plan needs to include that detail
Okay.
on radio communications and things of that nature.
Well, and it might make sense for the observer to be a pilot, and the operator of the aircraft may only need to be a UAS operator.
Correct.
They get the same training in terms of airspace management.
Just, yeah, somebody that knows how that the airport, I think it's a big safety factor is having a licensed person right there to advise, I mean, familiar especially with terminology so they can tell the approaching aircraft where the UAV is and that it's clear.
Yeah, we do use, as Jeff said, we use two people. The pilot's not mic'd up. The pilot only talks to the pilot assistant. The
Okay,
pilot
yeah.
assistant has the brick and talks to either,
Yeah, you mentioned the brick. That's your radio that's on VHF and can talk to other aircraft in the pattern.
I think that's the one that they talk to each other with, not necessarily on the
well,
frequency of the airport, though.
actually, when we're out at the Model Masters, we're on cell phones all together on a conference call. But we understand that if we were operating at the airport, we would use our VHF set, which that's what we used in Antarctica to talk to Pegasus Base, for instance.
Okay.
So is there ever more than one UAS operating at a time?
That's something we probably should address. We would like to eventually get to that. But we've been experimenting with that. We've followed FAA requirements, and that is we've had 2 aircraft in the air at one time, but with 2 separate pilots, which the FAA agrees with that. I mean, that's.
I'd go for that.
But there is the possibility of a flight where the 2 aircraft communicate with one another during the autonomous flight. But we would always have 2 pilots to recover the aircraft. You know, one pilot has aircraft A, the other pilot has aircraft B.
How many aircraft does KU have?
In the UAS category, flyable, we have 7 or 8. Of this size that you see on the screen here, we have 3 of those. That's what we took 3 to Greenland in case we lost 2. We always would have one flying, but
Wouldn't be a
we
waste
didn't
of
lose
trip.
anything.
A lot easier to transport that than it was the creases.
Yes, much easier.
I agree with the safety. I mean, I think that's just the number one issue for that operation. And it may not be a jet coming in every hour or so, but it's a pretty busy flight school as well. So there's a lot of inexperienced pilots or pilots that are soloing for the first time. And so, I mean, there's that flight schedule for the flight school's busy nearly all day long.
Well,
I mean, that would just be in the mix.
but the idea is that we would have pilot or observers covering 360 degrees at all times. But I should also mention that if we flew over the endowment area to the west of the airfield, there would really be no reason for a pilot to be at that area under 400 feet.
How much of endowment area is there to the west of the airport? I knew of a big area to the east of the airport,
Yeah, that's what I was wondering.
but I don't know of any to the west of the airport.
This box here, we understand
Is
down.
that, because,
That is, and I think this over here is,
see, the whole field on the east side of the airport where that plowed area is, as far as I knew, that whole area was endowment land, and I thought that there was private, that some individual family owned the part that you're saying on the other side of the hedge there, or the creek there, Mud Creek.
I didn't personally check that detail,
Okay.
but
You might be able to find some more space over there to the
Yeah.
east.
Because to the east is one that I always thought, as far as industrial development and things like that for the
Talking
airport
about
area
here?
would be good, but that's endowment-owned property over there.
You
so-
might be able to take off on 119 and operate in that area to the east and have more space.
Well, the problem is now is there's a wildlife hazard fence in between the endowment property and the runway, so that may create an issue on that side of the airport. As far as using the airspace over that area, I don't think that's an issue because you're not on the ground, you're not threatening somebody's property or anything, and it is inside the aerodome. So I don't think the ownership of the property is that key. I was just wondering if that was endowment.
I'm going to check that detail.
Because I was concerned when I was looking at the initial proposal, but I realize you're gonna be within line of sight at all time. And the one thing that the geological folk would be concerned about is they've got that neon project
Yeah.
out there that we're intimately familiar with, and they don't want to have the flora and fauna and cover being disturbed because they're looking at it for long-term studies and research. But I don't think you'd be in that area, and
Yeah, that's far enough away. I don't think it's.
and so the endowment property on the east side of the airport might be a more fertile area, I guess.
Well, I was going to say, with the flight plan that he has, I think that's the best way to go because that area that he's talking about west of the airport, that's right beside where their hangars are. There is a tree line in the way that if you could mitigate that, more power to you because I think that would benefit the safety of the airport in general. But even without that, if you're taking off of the runway and doing your space, your activities over there, your maneuvers and things, I think that would just, because you're enough off the ground, you're not threatening anything that's on the ground. I think that works out fine regardless of the ownership of the land because you're not going to intrude on their area anyway. But I think I was just pointing that out because of ownership of the land on the west side. But with the wildlife fence being up, that would create an issue with if you had access or had a landing or doing some maneuvers over there, having your people inside the fence along the runway area.
We would need people outside the fence observing.
So, but I think you guys, where you're going on the KU side of with the west side of the ramp, I think I don't see a problem with that as far as safety goes. You know, with especially, now, one thing you did say, you were talking about a 30,000 foot question or deal. What altitude are you guys normally operating?
Under 400.
Under
Typical
400. So
nominally
so-
300 feet AGL.
So you'd be below pattern altitude. The only aircraft that would be really in the same airspace as yours are those directly approaching or directly departing the aircraft or the airport.
Well, and overall, the proposals that I've made, we would be even under the aggressive sea operations. Oops, C2.
So,
No airplanes should be between.
with the
Ground.
exception of one main one. It's not an airplane, but you're right
Okay.
beside Lifestar hangar.
Sure.
And a lot of times, just like the other night when they're departing, they depart from their ramp area and slowly climb out, either over the airport or depending on where their route of flight, that they would be in that area. But if yours can be recalled or repositioned within 2 minutes, Lifestar, if they get on the radio, they can have a 2-minute warning to get clear to tell you their departure route.
And they're from the time they know they're leaving, it's 8 to 10 minutes.
So I
Well-
don't think that Lifestar would be a big factor in that as far as safety goes.
Well, we would, when I said that it was a 30,000 foot viewpoint,
Question.
I realize there's a lot of detail to this. So for helicopter operations, especially is it Lifestar? We would land just because, if we heard them firing up.
How much pain does that cause you? If we had jet aircraft coming into the airfield and they were insistent that you land before they landed to clear the airspace, what kind of pain does that cause you? And in this other situation, we're talking about Lifestar. If Lifestar insists that you land before they take off, is that going to be an issue? What's the pain level?
I see that as such an infrequent occurrence that it's not a significant irritant. I mean, we typically try to launch at dawn, not too much air traffic then. The reason that we flew for a whole day recently was we had 8 teams of students flying 3 flights.
Yeah, I was going to ask about that. You said that, that the one time you were flying all day long, that's not very frequent? It's mostly just at dawn?
We had 24, 25 flights to get done in 2 days.
That's the educational piece.
Right, and it
Some
happens
of
once a year.
Yeah. Okay.
Jeff had
And we-
asked about the number of average flight days per year, 20, I think you said?
20 to 30.
30. So if you have a shorter distance to travel, if you're operating down here, you see that number of average days per year going up, down, staying the same? What governs the number of days a year that you?
Well, and last year we flew maybe 10 times. We just, as research grants come and go, you have enough money to fly the flights. So I would say most recently it's 20 to 30 flights. I don't see any reason why it would be any more than that. We've had a couple of days where we've driven out to Model Masters and found that the winds are out of limit and had to come back. So
They were
getting at
worse
that.
than they were at the airport, huh?
Yeah.
Wow.
Well, and the thing is, if you know you've got good wind and you can go in a relatively short period of time,
Yeah, he's right there.
I guess that'd be
take the wings off the aircraft, put them in the car, drive it out there, put the wings back on.
I guess that'd be an advantage of having it at the airport. We've got a weather station there. You could know the winds before you even load up.
What are your weather minimums?
For this airplane,
Max.
crosswind is 12, gust to 15.
You wouldn't be flying today.
What's that?
You wouldn't have been flying today.
But there was no wind on the 29th through the 1st recently.
Yeah.
Beautiful flying.
How much runway do you need? What's the length of your landing strip
For landing,
or takeoff?
about 300 feet. For takeoff, 30 feet. It's pretty high-powered engine.
You mentioned a deconfliction process. Is that written down somewhere, or is that an agreed-on way?
We do have it written down in our, to fly in Antarctica, you have to have a ConOps document, and we specify that we would, check with the tower for any traffic, that if we would immediately land if there was an inbound aircraft, and if we couldn't clear the runway, we would go to a home waypoint and just orbit until the aircraft landed, which is actually the preferable way to do it, because you don't get on the runway that they're landing.
So you have one of those for every site you fly out of?
Yes.
And you said 12 knots. Is that just 12 knots period or 12 knots of crosswind component?
I'm drawing a blank. I said 12 and 15. That sounds like higher than our crosswind allowable.
Coefficient should be.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that's
That's
straight.
any wind from any direct, even if it's right.
Well, no, there is a crosswind requirement. I'm a structures guy, basically.
Yeah.
So
Well-
I let the aerodynamics people remember those numbers.
Do you have a preference over which part of the airport you would use? I'm going to make the perhaps incorrect assumption you'd rather be flying off the runway that's adjacent to your hangar, right?
Yes.
Instead of having to go to some other part of the airport.
Yes, but it's a lot easier to deploy to still on the airport.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Okay. I think, I haven't measured the height of those trees along that
Mud Creek.
runway, but I'll bet you if you, just looking at them, it looks to me like they're already penetrating the 7-to-1. And they probably should have come down a long time ago.
Now, would that be, is it 7-to-1 go to the side of the runways as well?
That's the slope to the side of the runway, yeah. You cannot have anything penetrating that
Well, I know we eliminated the ones at the end, but yeah,
Just on the approach and departure ends.
that the 7-to-1.
The 7-to-1 is for the sides. That's the max. You cannot have anything penetrating an imaginary 7-to-1 slope to the sides of the runways, measured from the object-free zone to the side of the runway.
To the left edge of the runway in this case for 01?
Correct. So if those trees are, let's just say for the sake of discussion, that that tree line is 50 feet from the side of the runway?
It's further than 50 feet. It's much further than 50 feet.
Okay. But you can do the math. I mean,
Yeah, but I'll bet it's 300 feet.
So if they're,
Yeah,
you can't,
if they're
Would you
50
agree with
feet
that, Mark?
tall,
yeah, right about here. I'd say it's
Yeah.
about 300, because the runway is 100 feet wide.
so at 300, then the trees couldn't be over.
remember, you're measuring not from the edge of the runway, you're measuring from the edge of the object-free area.
Oh, okay.
Oh,
Okay.
So,
So it's where you start is beyond the edge of the runway.
Yeah, we need to look at that.
So,
with the-
anyway,
that's, yeah, that's
those
beyond
trees
what this is.
those trees maybe should come down regardless, is what I'm
Yeah.
saying. So,
Okay.
One of the things I can tell you that I don't like about how we're set up is, thanks for leaving that up, Mark. If we're taking off on 1-5, I cannot see people that might be on, the western half of 119.
yeah.
And so
Stretch
I'm
view.
rolling down the runway 100 miles an hour and I'm looking to the right after I get past the tree line, and I don't like having to do that. But,
But that's, we'll get back on subject though.
yeah.
off with their heads.
So, does anybody else have questions for Mark?
All your flights weekdays, not weekends,
We fly on weekends sometimes,
so both? Okay.
but we could avoid flying on weekends. We wouldn't fly during a race, for instance.
And it's all daytime operations, right? Nothing
Yes.
at night?
Could they be scheduled in advance, or are you more spur of the moment than that?
Oh, no, we schedule in advance. We have a requirement to have the aircraft inspected for flight 24 hours before takeoff.
So we have time to talk to everybody we need to talk to that's on the airfield that might be impacted, and have Lloyd issue a note on that.
Is there a category in the NOTAMs for UAVs or traffic like that? I didn't know, I don't remember the categories when they're doing the training.
No.
It would just be a advisory.
Yeah, you could do an advisory.
Yep.
People be aware of it.
So certainly part of our process would be an advisory checklist.
You mentioned this airport in Indiana that's doing this. Are there other airports that are doing it as well? And do you have a list of those airports?
I'm compiling a list.
Okay.
I've got a number of them here, but I know, for instance, that Texas A&M, MIT fly off of runways. Cal Poly Pomona flies off municipal runways, and there's undoubtedly more.
Right.
But I could
I think what
provide that data.
would be helpful in that area is just as since we're looking at this green, if we could get a copy of what their agreements are with them as far as those go. And one thing I don't know that we've said it out here is you have like insurance cover in case it does happen to get off the insurance requirements. The standard that we have for other commercial activities at the airport is $1 million coverage for liability, and you guys would have liability coverage for that.
Yes.
So that's
And I believe we have it at the $1 million.
okay. That's that's the. I think
It's not
that's
just us,
standard.
it's the whole universe.
Okay, super. Because I know that's been a.
Part 107 presents, many times we say relative to it, that you can't fly within 5 miles of an airport. But if you actually read that statute, read that reg, that's not what it says. It says you can fly there if you have, air traffic control's permission to do that, and the local airport. And, given my aversion about the FAA, I would think that it would be better if we were to get a hard and fast proposal put together that deals with when the local airport, and that would be us, would allow these kinds of activities to occur under what circumstances before we go knocking on the door of the FAA with this proposal.
Right.
Well, yeah, that's,
I just want to make sure that we're all sort of walking down the same
No, I
pathway.
completely agree. The first step is to get
Yeah.
people nearby to agree.
You mentioned your accident-free safety record since 2010. Is that how long the department's been conducting UAS?
No, we put an 1,100-pound airplane on the Pegasus ice runway in Antarctica in I said 2010, in 2011. But I'm talking small UAS since 2010, accident-free. And so we don't fly that airplane anymore.
yeah.
So, just like a misbehaving child, we've gotten better with time.
So, the research side of the university, the learning curve.
Well, as you know, flying is inherently dangerous, and we have to take great precautions to make sure we're safe.
So, well, do that. Do we have any public comment on this issue at all?
Yeah, I've got several concerns that the operator out there that, I guess,
Lloyd, we're doing this on TV, so we need you to step up to the microphone, please.
You gotta be official.
Introduce
Okay.
yourself.
Lloyd Hetrick, 805 Diamond Head Drive, as the operator of the airport. I guess my concern is obviously, as Cheri mentioned, we've got, students out there learn how to fly. In some ways, I don't look at this a whole lot different than our parachuters. In some aspects, we got activity going on that's a little smaller, not, maybe not as safe as we would like. I'd like that. I want to be a neighbor with KU, believe me. What I don't want to do is get to where we just got every Tom, Dick, and Harry that's flying the RCs out there by Clinton decide, well, I've seen some out at the airport. We just go out there and start doing it. I think we can obviously, keep control of that. But when you talk about NOTAM, I'm always skeptical of NOTAMs. I'd like to put them out when they need to be. What I feel like in this case, if we can operate these like an aircraft, as Mark mentioned, if we've got a pilot there that's running this as no different than, Al Schubert running around there in his little yellow plane, and we've got control and we're communicating with everybody, I'd prefer to just operate under those guidelines. They're communicating before they take off land, and they got somebody there listening to the other aircraft coming in and out. So I don't know that we would need, the reason for the NOTAM, I agree it'd be safety saying, yeah, I'd NOTAM, but I think with these big operators coming in, they pull up the NOTAMs, they see there's little RC airplanes flying around.
Scare them.
They might be more inclined to go somewhere else.
That's
if
exactly
that's
why
the-
I think it needs to be in there.
And if that's the case, then I don't know if I'm in favor of having them there.
Yeah, but
Because if they
that's
can't
a-
operate as a pilot would operate a plane, then we do have safety concerns, don't we?
Well, I don't know. I think we have to come up with operational procedures that,
Protect the
this
integrity of
group thinks is safe and recommends it, and then others agree. And certainly, it's not just this group of people that's going to decide
Yeah.
whether it's safe or not. But this is such a new thing. I think it's unfair to not announce that you're operating UASs in the airport traffic area at this time. I just don't think we're accustomed to that yet. 5 years from now, this might be something that doesn't need to be made an advisory to those arriving in aircraft. But I think now, that's the fair thing to do.
Well, it'd be such a few, 30 days in a year is pretty low number
Right.
on the higher end. But on the deal about everybody thinking that they can come out and fly them, he would be operating on a certificate of authority from the FAA. So there's the steps that he has to go through. So it's not that somebody that just picked up a drone at the neighborhood hobby shop comes out and can do that. But,
Okay, yeah.
but this one, from what I'm understanding, would be through the FAA approval. They would have a certificate of authority, and not only that, but they would have a certified pilot there with them, assuring the safety of the air traffic in the
And maybe we
vicinity.
just go a step further with the NOTAM, we just state UFA being operated by private pilot, something, just so
Yeah.
that people don't just think
I-
in general.
I think that's a valid concern.
I'm not against NOTAM, don't misunderstand, if
Yeah.
they're directed, I just don't want the open end that they just say, well, I don't.
Well,
I think we'd have to really consider what it is that you put in that advisory,
There's-
because you don't want to have adverse economic impact
Yeah.
to
Well,
your
there's-
airport when they're operating for a day.
I
I
think-
agree with that.
As of right now, I don't think there's a category in the NOTAM for a UAS.
It just has to be an aerodrome general
Yeah.
comment.
But,
Right.
Yeah,
but the other side is these aren't true UASs because you got a guy over there manning it that is going to assure
Well,
its operation.
It
So,
is a UAS.
Yeah.
It's just at a higher category.
yeah.
And that's why I asked how many other airports are doing it. I don't think we need to try to reinvent the wheel here. If there's
Just kind of get
other
it.
airports that are doing it and have a successful procedure in place,
Yeah, let's
let's just copy that. Yeah, I mean, let's not.
Mark, is that something you could get to us, do you think? I think that would be extremely helpful to see what their policies and procedures are.
Yeah.
But
Because
I
I think
understand your concern, Lloyd, about sort of setting a precedent in another business of,
Yeah.
and then.
Or like an uncontrolled activity would be.
Right.
yeah. And if I could say, if we could keep everything on one side of that main air runway, if we I don't know that I'm in favor of running across the 1533 to the east boundaries necessarily, just keep it away. If they can depart 119, stay well south of Taxiway A and everything west there and below 300 feet, or whatever, then we're staying, we're right, like you say, with Lifestar. So obviously Lifestar needs to be involved with this.
And then,
And I have no doubt they'll want them on the ground before they depart, so or start up anyway. So we just need to be aware of that. I wouldn't, like I say, if we can operate everything west, and you don't need to go across to the east side, even though, like you say, in the middle of the airport, they're either gonna be on the ground or they're gonna be running. I would just keep it all east if we could do, or west of
Yeah.
it too, so.
well, they have a licensed pilot on a headset, so if somebody's making a low approach and actually announces it, but
Well,
if,
in my mind, they need to operate just like anybody else.
and that's the way, I think
Yeah.
we're talking about them operating pretty close to where anybody else, to where
I
they
don't
would
think
have a
it's pretty
pilot on
close.
the
I think
radio.
it is, they're
Yeah.
operating under,
Actually, it'd be a little bit better than the average person, because the average person's not required to use a radio where their activities would
Yeah.
be, so.
But I agree, but not right away. I think the point about using NOTAMs initially, because this is not part of the normal operating environment at Lawrence Memorial. It will at some point in time, just like when Lifestar, everybody knows about Lifestar now, but before they showed up, it was an oddity for a while. So I don't see anything wrong with using NOTAMs or something like that initially.
Well, and the drones could almost fall in that same category. They don't get, I don't know if you were involved, but they got a website that you go to that tells you where the drones are being operated and what out. It's so new, it's not accurate yet, or not being utilized, I should say. But if somebody flies a drone within the 5 miles of the airport, we're not required to put a NOTAM. Don't even know necessarily about them, but you got that concern. Pretty soon the drone operators are gonna think they can come, they think so anyway. I don't know.
Well,
I'm probably more concerned about the drone operators than I am more UAS, because they're more limited, and like you say, those are usually gonna be controlled by private pilots, but not necessarily the drones would be.
I mean, it may only be 30 days a year, but you can bet your bottom dollar that some of those 30 days are gonna be when everybody else in the world is at the airport because of the weather.
because it's can't
And
be.
until they're used to UAS operating there, it'll be different.
So it'd be educating pilots as well as educating the students. But I really think that with the communication side being taken care of, even if it is a busy day at the airport, that they could work together, that they could, with proper communication, these guys could be off to the side and below the pattern altitude that I think that could.
I just a detail, but I just looked up the primary surface that 701 starts at. On a visual runway, it's 250 feet wide. So if you have a 100-foot wide runway,
75.
you're 75 feet past the edge of the runway where that 701 starts.
So,
Right.
So,
Okay,
okay.
Super.
So,
so we might address
So
that.
you take half, what'd you say, 250 feet? So you take
For a
125 feet from
that's
the
a
center
run-
line.
right, that's
And
a
then you start
runway,
at 71.
that's a visual runway with no instrument approach.
Okay.
If you have an instrument approach, it's 500 feet. Wide.
So 250 from the center line, then you start your
Then you
71.
start your 7-1.
Okay.
Right.
Well, it's good to have him on the board, isn't it?
I'm Ron Renz. I operate
Put you
a
to
couple
sleep.
businesses out at the airport. I think I would kind of second Lloyd's comment on this is all about safety and operating airplanes, and there's now been a couple of airplane drone accidents, and there's been a recent study that a drone will do a lot more damage to an airplane than a bird will. So we need to be careful of that. I know Mark's very cognizant of that, and I've worked with Mark on some of this stuff. I think the closer we make, if this is allowed, the closer we make the operation to operating a normal airplane, the better it's going to be from a safety standpoint, because that's what we pilots are used to seeing. We pilots are used to seeing airplanes land and take off on runways, not on grass strips off the side of the runways, not on taxiways. I think the more we can make it like an airplane operation, the higher probability it'll have a higher safety operation. I think that's good. I think Mark's suggestion of his Operation C, where it's over top of the airport, I don't think that's a good idea, because airplanes over the middle of the airport often are below 300 feet there. Student pilots don't land at the ends of the runways. Sometimes they land in the middle of the runways because they're still learning how to land. There's low approaches, there's go-arounds and that sort of thing. So I think to try to operate over top of the airplane, assuming there's not going to be airplanes there, is not a good idea. I think where Mark's proposed it is, on this, Plan A and B operation is probably the best place to put it. You're getting the drones away from where the airplanes should be operating, because even an airplane doing a low approach isn't going to be flying there. And so that's a good place to put the drone. It's a good place to operate. It's probably better for Mark because, you know, you can, like you said, you could put an observation platform on the top of their hangar. They can see it from the hangar. That's a better way to do it. I think that's a much better operation than try to operate at the east side of the airport or over top there. I think Mark's Plan C that he's shown was not a good idea, just because airplanes will be there. They can be there over there. That's not a good idea. I like what Mark's proposed from the operation of communications. I think that's really important. And that they're going to have somebody that's in, you know, I think we need to specify when we mean pilot, I think we mean airplane pilot, not UAS pilot, because in Part 107, a UAS pilot is considered a pilot. It's not the same because they knew a little bit about airspace and all that, but they're not familiar with airport and runway operations because it's not part of 107. And I think the requirement of an airplane pilot is good, and I think that's what Mark's proposing. That's a good idea. The communications is important. The communications on the Unicom is important, but you don't want his entire UAS operation on the Unicom. You don't want them, when their engineers are talking, I mean, I operate test airplanes all the time, where we have 10 people in the back of the airplane. There's only one guy that's on the UAS, VHF frequency talking to other airplanes. And I think that's what Mark's proposing, but I don't know that, but that's what it should be.
That's an important distinction.
Yeah, it's a really important distinction, that because he's running a test operation, I understand that. I understand those operations. That's what I do. You need a lot of communication within the team, but there's only one guy that talks to the outside world. And I think that's what Mark's proposing. And
And that needs to be somebody that's familiar with talking to aircraft and pattern because
exactly.
they've done it.
Hence the airplane pilot.
Yeah.
Rather than the UAS pilot. And I think that's an important distinction. I think that's what Mark's proposing. And I think that's what he's talking about. I think with whatever is put together, it needs to have those kinds of things in it. I think if we do, and it's all about safety. I think that we're talking about that. I think Mark's proposing that. He understands that. I mean, he's a pilot as well. And he understands that safety is important. I mean, they've lost a couple of UAVs, you know, in the early days. But, you know, like you said, they've learned. They know a lot more than they did 10, 15 years ago, and that's good. I think we've got, I mean, they're trying to do it responsibly, and I think that's, if we put something together with proper safety procedures, it can work. I agree with, a NOTAM needs to be published. I mean, we're not at a stage 5 years from now where UAVs are flying with airplanes. We're not there yet. We may be, we may not be, we don't know. We'll find out. But I think a NOTAM would need to be published, and that's important. Yes, it's going to be potentially detrimental to the operations at the airport because there's some operators that would not come in. It's a fact of life. We're not talking about 365 days of drone operations. I mean, Mark's talking his wildest dreams, maybe 30 days a year. Well, 30 days a year is 2-3 days a month. That's quite a bit. What I'm a little concerned about, if he's going to operate 30 flights in one day, what about all the other? I mean, I think you can operate 30 flights in one day out at the Model Masters, but you're not going to be able to operate 30 flights in one day at Lawrence Airport because there's just too much traffic. No, Lawrence is not a busy airport, but there's too much traffic for that kind of operation. You need to think about that too. That's an important consideration that Mark needs to think about because that's going to impact his operation as well as it's going to impact airport operations. And that I think those things can be worked out, and I think that's important.
Do you care to comment on whether or not Lifestar will want to have those UAS aircraft on the ground? Before starting?
My guess would be they would treat this like anything else. They would prefer to have I would guess, I don't know, but my belief is that they would want the UAV on the ground or at some point away from the airport before they fire up the helicopter. That's kind of what their operation mode is. Do I know that? No, I don't. I would have to talk to them about that. But that would be my guess. Yeah, and I think that either on the ground or away in that area away from the airport, I think can work. I think that if Lifestar knows where you're going to be operating, and I think you can work something out. And I think that would be part of it. I think that would have to need to get them in on that discussion as well. I think that's really important.
Ron, you used the term it would be important to have a pilot so that we're making...
Airplane pilot.
Airplane pilot, yeah. Yes. But you and I know there's a whole series of ranges of airplane pilots from ATP down to a student pilot.
Yep.
And I don't mean to put you on the spot here, but are we talking about a minimum standard there that, we're not going to want student pilots to be the operating, the operator?
I agree. I think there should be a minimum standard. I think it needs to be, my belief, it should be a licensed pilot, not a student pilot. Right. I think somebody with a private license would be okay because they understand what final is and what base is and where the airplanes are, and that's important. Those kinds of things are important. And it probably ought to be a licensed pilot that has a current BFR, because the rules do change, and that then that person is up to the current rules, and that's important. So not just somebody who had a pilot license 20 years ago.
Right.
I think it's somebody that has a pilot license, is a current pilot. I don't think the pilot would need to be 90-day takeoff and landing current. That's not important for this operation, but I think it would be important that they understand the current rules today. So I think somebody with the biennial flight review would be a good idea. Again, what makes a safe operation? I'm thinking, from a test operation. I mean, I understand testing, I understand research, I understand what Mark's doing, and it's all about understanding the rules, understanding the operations, understanding what the test operation is doing. I know Mark does that. Understanding what the airport part of it is, and that's where they're a little bit lax maybe, but they've got somebody that they can use to do that, and there's enough people at the university or students or somebody resource that can provide that for them. And I think that can be all made to work.
I think on the Lifestar side of it, if we have a person on a radio that way that can relate a Lifestar, it's different than like the skydiving issue because skydivers are jumping, you have no idea where they are. There's no communication to know exactly where those people are. Where the UAVs would be a lot easier to work with. If you have a pilot knows where it is, he can radio to Lifestar. We're, 1 mile west of the field. We're in the quarter, where they are. Much like if we were in the pattern, we can say, hey, we're on left downwind. We're clear of your departure area. We'll be looking for you. And the same thing with if we have a licensed pilot on the radio with these guys, I think that would work a lot better with the Lifestar operation where they wouldn't have to wait to fire up their engines safely to make sure that the UASs were out of their way.
Yeah, I agree with what you said, Richard. Especially what Mark's talking about is he's talking about within 1 minute having the UAV in some kind of a safe holding area.
I think that's perfect.
1 minute, I don't know. I don't know from Lifestar standpoint. I was pretty much be certain that with a 1 minute notice, that would be acceptable. Do I know that? No. And I think we'd have to talk about that. But that seems like a reasonable thing. 1 minute is different than 5 or 10 minutes.
Correct.
And you're right. I mean, if we're talking about the kind of operation that Mark has, there's always somebody in communication that they can be talked to, either on the radio or something, so that Lifestar or Lloyd's operation or somebody coming in on approach, they're listening on the Unicom, they know where that airplane is. They would know that if he's on approach to runway 33, he knows where the airplane's coming from or where Lifestar's coming. And I think it would be important for your operation to understand how Lifestar operates in the pattern, because the helicopter operates opposite to an airplane. The airplane's primarily left-hand pattern at Lawrence, and the helicopter's right-hand pattern, because that's just a normal helicopter operation. Now, I think that education and that communication would need to be part of that agreement, and I think that makes sense. Because the other thing that I know Mark's going to be concerned about is a 55-pound airplane with the helicopter rotor going. The 55-pound airplane is going to lose.
Yeah.
And he doesn't want to lose his UAV either, because the downwash from the helicopter is going to destroy his UAV. He knows, he recognizes that. Now, it may also destroy the helicopter, but but he's going to destroy the UAV, and so he's going to want to get his UAV out of the way of the helicopter for the same reason. And that's just smart, safe operations on his part, smart, safe operations on Lifestar's part, or anybody else for that matter.
Sounds great. I appreciate it. Thank you. Okay. Anybody else have any more questions?
No question.
So,
I have just a question for the board, and that is, and I don't know whether this is sort of a chicken and egg thing, but do we need to amend our airport minimum standards and include a section for UAVs, which currently we do not have?
I think that is something to look at down the road. I think what we have in front of us that we've just pushed through today is a good change to do that, and we could work on an amendment or addition to include just that portion instead of rewriting and repassing minimum standards again, that as we work through this procedure, we come up with a recommendation for the city to do that. I think the one thing about a minimum standards would be assuming that they're going to do this at a lot of different places. I think this one right now is specific to the approval that KU Research has. But if we're going to expand it to a business side, then we would definitely have to have those minimum standards.
Yeah, like I said, I don't know.
I think at this
Which
point,
comes
what we're
first?
talking about is specifically for KU. So
Right.
it's going to be an agreement between the city and KU, and those minimum standards will be reflected in there. You do a general minimum standard, you could end up like Lloyd is suggesting. Anyone could come out there, meet the minimum standards, and start flying. This is specifically for an operation that KU is proposing.
Right.
And I think the key is, on this one, is the communication side. I think that is
If I
a
can
big
summarize
plus.
just a little bit, it sounds like the board isn't opposed, providing that maybe, Mark, if you bring back some additional information to address some of the questions, and at least we can get started in some discussions between the city and KU to make sure you know, that we get everything taken care of as well. The board may want to consider then having a January meeting so that Mark can come back, we can get this approved. So I'm assuming you want to get this started like in the spring to be
Yeah,
going.
I agree.
And with the FAA approvals and stuff like that, we need to get this
Moving pretty
on.
quick.
And obviously, everything's gonna have to be, you know, the communications are gonna have to be there. We can even set up a meeting, with Greg Hildebrand and Lifestar, and we can, Mark and I can go out there and talk to him. You know, just make sure that we get the operational, guidelines together so that everybody knows what's going on, but it doesn't sound like anybody's necessarily opposed. We just gotta make sure that we do it appropriately and get the approvals. And then we can bring back the information that the board's kind of suggested maybe in January, to another board meeting and get those questions answered for you.
Okay.
That's appropriate.
And I share Gary's point that, you know, I don't want to have us creating a minimum standards
Right.
by this agreement.
Yeah, this wouldn't set necessarily the airport minimum standard, but it would set a minimum standard for this operation between
Right.
the city and
But
KU.
I don't want that
To be
to somehow
assumed.
become a default for the minimum standards.
Right.
And somebody to say, you know, well, KU has this arrangement, I'm willing to work under that same arrangement, therefore, you know, let me fly my remote control vehicle that will bug the heck out of Lloyd.
Yeah, yep, I just feel like if you're going to allow this activity, you probably need to amend your minimum standards at some point to encompass this activity, because it's a growth area of aviation, and somebody else may want to do it, or like you said, it may attract a commercial enterprise of some sort to the airport that wants to do it. So I just think it's something we should take up at some point in the future, so.
I agree.
Well, if it did become something that would be a commercial operation, there need to be somebody to make that happen. So that's a business opportunity. Perhaps for the FBO.
I'm not sure how much fuel sales there'll be in those, but, yeah. So, okay, so to proceed tonight, I think the board is in favor of this type of activity, or this activity with KU.
Well, I wouldn't go so far as to say we think it's safe, and
No, I think
I think you need to agree that we're interested in further discussion.
okay.
I agree.
And I think we ought to consider a subcommittee to work with Mark and Lifestar on this. Because there's a lot of stuff that needs to be vetted for operational procedures if we're going to do this.
Absolutely, I mean, the action implies, I'm still learning about the board in the airport, but I would think there's a whole range of policies, procedures that have got to be adapted to incorporate UAS.
I agree.
Because it may be an airplane, but it's not an airplane. It's different, it's got unique characteristics that will create unique situations that first responders, everybody else. are
It's
gonna
an
have to be
airplane, but it's
introduced
not
to
a
and
life.
involved. Pardon?
It's an airplane, but it's not a life.
Yeah.
Can't say that, because it could run into somebody.
Yeah.
That,
Yeah,
that's
so-
what I mean.
so-
That's what I'm
It's
saying.
not a
That's what
life.
she's saying.
Let me
It's
not a
remind
body in that
everybody,
airplane.
we are trying to record this, and comments from the public, and this is at the board's discussion at this point, so discussion back and forth is probably not very well accounted for on the TV.
Thank you, Cheri. Okay, so for us to proceed, one, we're gonna have to just, like I said, schedule a meeting, preferably, probably the earlier part of January. And then, is this something you want Mark to bring back to the board with it? Or do you want a subcommittee to meet with Mark, meet with Greg Hildebrand, and get something together so when we bring something back to the board in January, it'll be something a little more formal?
Well, it seems to me that at the very least, we should provide Mark with some kind of written list of what additional information we're asking for, because we kind of threw a lot of stuff out there verbally, but I don't want to put words in his mouth, but if I were in his shoes, I would want some document that says, here's the information I need to come back with.
Okay.
I don't know if we need to form a subcommittee to do that, but somebody should,
Well, I
we
think-
should communicate, I think, in writing what it is exactly that we're asking for as far as.
The good thing, this is all videotaped, so Mark could take a look at this on YouTube tomorrow and jot down everything that you guys wanted.
If I may, I would be happy to put together a list, which I've started to file here.
Things that I need to bring to you. And then you could.
And I think I
feedback.
could sit down with Mark and add to that list, or maybe fill in some gaps and.
I know, it's a long walk to your office from my office.
Yeah,
Okay.
but who knows when each of us is gonna be there.
Yeah.
But we could work that out, that piece of it.
Okay.
I will get said list together. And also, you mentioned maybe more of a market survey of what other municipalities have done. They may have operations plans that have already been developed.
Yep, and we can just cut and paste. Actually, that's part that I'd really, if that's something that's out there, like the University of Indiana has a good agreement with their airport, if we could get a copy of that for us to study in the meantime, that would be perfect.
Can we individually communicate with Jeff so that he has everything, or
No,
are
you
we
should-
in open
my
meetings problem?
Communication should be through me.
Okay. Okay.
What is the city's expectation of the board and by when?
Well, obviously, the city's interested in working with KU on developing something out here. And I think, I'm speaking out of turn here, but I'm assuming you want to get started in this spring, next spring.
Yes.
So then, I'm just backing the time off. When you're talking 60, 90 days with the FAA, you're talking January, February to get something back to the city commission.
So by the end of January, the city commission would be looking for a recommendation from the board, one way or the other?
Probably
about the
February, because we've only got one city commission meeting in January.
agreement? Okay,
So if we can get our stuff together in January
Sure.
to present to the city
Yeah,
commission in
and
February.
then we'll have to work out the agreement with KU, obviously, but
With regard to timing, sooner is better, but we
Yeah,
understand
exactly.
that.
And I think that's where working together is going to be a deal. So I think with that, it would be good if we could have a subcommittee meet together with everybody to try and put everything together. So at our next advisory board meeting, we have a document to present. And maybe if we can get it together for then, get the comments from this board, get it out to public comment pretty quickly after that. And then, and maybe just try and move things along, because otherwise it's, by the time you get it to the FAA, it's going to be a delay. So do we have,
Let me ask this question. I think we really have two pieces. We have a COA that Mark and the University of Kansas will present to the FAA for approval, which probably will not have all the detail that our UAS operational procedures document that will be created together will have in it.
Actually, our application will have all the details.
Will it?
Yeah,
Okay.
the COAs are very succinct in what they say you can do, but there's a lot more information that we give them that doesn't show up on the actual COA document, the
Oh,
authorization.
okay, because all I have seen before are the COA documents. Okay. So we really do have to get this whole thing kind of resolved as to how we might do this at Lawrence Municipal before you even submit the COA.
Right, and we can submit it without any input from the city, but the FAA is not gonna operate on it.
Okay.
They don't want to become alienated from municipal airports.
so,
I know Mark wants to do this next spring, but I think we don't want to rush this because there's safety implications here. I think this needs to be thoroughly thought through. I think you don't want to rush this. You want to do it properly. You want to think through. I like the idea of a subcommittee. I like working with Lifestar, working with Mark. That's a really good idea. But I see this as back and forth more than just one meeting. Because there's significant operational safety aspects here that need to be thought through properly. It's no different than a parachute operation. It's no different than somebody trying to do an unusual. This is, guys, what you're doing here is you're breaking new ground. There are a few precedents. Each precedent that's been done has very, very specific operational needs and requirements. This has to be, my recommendation, should be thought through very carefully, because what you're doing is different than what's been done before. Maybe it's been done at a handful of other airports. It's going to take time to get that information. It's going to take time to review that information. Some of that information won't apply to this airport. Some of it will. You got to go through that. This is not, I don't see this happening by the next Airport Advisory Board meeting. I've done this kind of thing. I've put together safety operational programs like this at places like Edwards Air Force Base, at places like Moses Lake, Washington. You're not going to do this in a month. That's just the practical realities of putting something like this. This is new. It's novel. It's unusual. And there's going to be things that you think about tomorrow that aren't going to be relative until you start hashing it out. There has to be give and take on Mark's side. I think Mark's got a good handle on what he needs. We've got a good handle on what an airport needs, but we don't have a good handle on what the two together need. And that takes some time to work those things through. Don't rush this. Safety is what the implications are if you do rush it. It's my recommendation.
Thank you, Rob.
I've done this before.
So going forward,
Who's got a rec?
who's got what?
Who's got a recommendation?
There you go. Let's,
Well, I think we could, let me suggest that we, Jeff apparently has volunteered to be the point of contact to solicit whatever
I'll
additional.
clarify what I volunteered for.
Right, whatever additional information.
I'm not interested in chairing the subcommittee. I just can't do that right now. I am interested in working with Mark so that we get closer through Chuck to getting all the questions answered that we need to
Right.
before we have our next meeting.
So that's my suggestion, is that you do that, and then we will.
And we can do that, I think, largely through email.
Right.
Is that okay with you, Chuck?
Between you and Mark?
No.
Not you and the board?
no,
No, me and the board,
No,
no.
we can't collect
no.
No.
without
We gotta go
without you.
through Chuck.
Okay.
So,
So do you want us to send all of our recommended questions for answer to you?
Yes.
Will your people call our people? That's what's gonna happen.
So does that mean that after that, you can pass it to me and I can pass it on to Mark, or you can pass it to Mark and I
I
and
can just
then?
pass it to Mark and you probably, yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Just to be clear then, do I have to send that list I've
Agreed to come up with
Please.
to you.
Yes.
if you send it to Chuck, then he can properly disperse it.
Yep.
So,
Do you happen to know how many other universities have UAV programs right now?
Almost every major university,
so,
100.
but
That many.
that operate out of a public use airport.
Well, I know MIT.
Indiana, yeah.
Well, if there's
So,
if
I was
there's
just
100
thinking, Embry-Riddle seems to have a little bit of
Yep.
every activity at its
Well-
deal, so I wonder.
I'll get that information, but
But there's no National Association of Collegiate UAS.
What's that?
What we
it's a
need
good idea though.
is a university program at a non-towered airfield for public use with the Lifestar
Operation
helicopter operation.
Okay.
and
We can find
runways,
one of
I'll see
those,
if I
we're
can
in
find
there.
one.
Then we're there.
and runways
then we get it done by
1533 and
February.
It has their ConOps document already
Yeah.
written.
Yeah.
Easy button.
No.
Um, So to try and organize things before the next meeting, to get this put together, to kind of organize a document or that, I think rather than just go everything through Chuck, I think it would be important to have a subcommittee that got together to meet with everybody, and
I
you don't
think
agree?
that's premature at this point. We've got a bunch, I think we've got a bunch of we can agree to, that there's a consensus on this issue and this issue and this issue, so long as we make these possible changes to it. But to put that to a subcommittee is just premature at this point. I think we need to get the ideas in. You know, we can funnel them to Chuck and then to Mark, and Mark can funnel them back to Chuck. And
And then
I
we
would
decide
suggest
to meet.
we put a deadline on it for ourselves, that if you have anything that you need, you get to Chuck, you get it to him by December 31. Okay? And
Is there a consensus on the board that we work towards trying to see if we can work an agreement out?
Yes.
Basically.
Yes.
Yes.
yeah,
Okay.
I consider that a win.
I would with
big-
this group.
A big giant step. So,
Appreciate your time. Thank you.
okay, thanks, Mark.
Thanks, Mark.
Okay,
I think we'd be sitting here in January with a lot more gaps from this. Because right now, I mean, we started out tonight with grass strips and a letter. But if we have a lot of information filled in by a January meeting, then maybe we look at a subcommittee or some more
Right.
formal effort in
That's what I
shaping an
think, yeah.
agreement to present to the city.
Yeah, now it's not this board's purview to shape the agreement between the city and KU.
Okay.
it's
This
ours to,
board purview is to make recommendation as to whether or
or
not.
the safe
this-
operation
Yeah,
of things.
safe operation.
So,
The city attorney's office, and I'm sure KU, will
work out the
draft the
legal side.
agreement.
Yeah.
Okay.
So we just want the procedures in place
Yes.
here, and then they'll work out the agreement. One thing I was gonna ask is, on yours, you have the Lawrence Airport listed as LMA. How, can we change that to LWC? LMA is actually an airport in California. Instead of Lawrence Municipal, it's, Lima Whiskey Charlie, so that would help, especially when you move forward with documents with the FAA, they'll see Lima Whiskey Charlie rather than,
As a pilot, I embarrassed
but just a clerical deal. Yeah, that's Lawrence Municipal Airport, so, so. we
I
could-
was going to tell you that in private.
I still use 3LA.
It was a matter of, I should type less letters.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. So, no, you're fine.
That's cool.
But yeah, okay. So we've agreed to the path we're gonna take there, and Chuck's gonna collect the information and pass it on to us. So with moving on, the FBO report.
I'd like to get, the only thing I'd like to make, I don't know if I got anything, everybody knows there's a wildlife thing going on and stuff like that, but,
There is?
yeah, but, yeah, they're coming right along, they're doing well.
It really looks good.
The deer are still running through the fence somehow, but that's fine, we got poles out there. Back to the, parachute draft, would it be inappropriate for you're gonna submit the proposals as written to the city board for approval? Would it be out of line to put in there, I mean, I'm not convinced we need to do anything yet until FAA says we have to, because FAA hasn't said we need to do anything yet. So could there be some draft with that we still don't recommend until FAA makes us do something? And if they do so, then this would be what we would recommend or something of that nature?
So do you feel like those procedures are condoning it?
Well,
Is that what?
Well, that's my, yeah, I'd say, well, we're ready to go, just tell us when you're gonna do it. I'm not,
well,
you know what?
actually, what we need to do is back up, because the city has never actually turned down skydiving at the airport. They've never approved or denied skydiving. We've turned down about, years ago when a proposal was given to us, the proposal that was given to us was not acceptable, so that was turned down. Interim minimum standards per FAA we have a set of standards that the skydivers need to use. The city commission, in meeting with the proposed operator, wanted us to come up with more guidelines as far as how that operation goes. The proposal for the procedures is actually from the city commission to have them have guidelines in the future for somebody that would want to propose a drop zone. Those aren't because of the FAA mandate. We send them to the FAA for approval, but those actually were a request from the city commission to this board to come up with those procedures. So that's a response of a request of this board from the city commission. So those are city documents. So if somebody comes to a city commissioner and says, hey, I want to start operating a drop zone, what can I do? And that kind of gives the city a basis to start that with. It's not a,
But it gives them something to base off of, where right
Correct.
now,
Which
if
the
we don't
minimum-
have anything there, then we deal with it if we
no,
have to.
the minimum standards are still there in the city's guidelines. There's minimum standards for operating a parachute operation at the airport. This kind of further defines that on the city side, because there's not a lot of regulatory oversight on skydive operations.
Well, I
The
think
FAA
you know
and
what I'm
USPA,
asking, so-
I am, but yeah, I know, it's kind of backwards on how things go. Normally, this type of thing would be done between an operator and, just like Mark's coming to us with the UAS project, they would be done between an operator and, the city ironing out the differences of proposal. This is kind of setting the groundwork because of other things that have happened. So the minimum standards have been there. We're not endorsing or denouncing. We're just refining. So, no other activity, any excitement out there? The president of Columbia
I
came
can
and
do
went.
a little bit more of an update on the construction. Rick Bryant, who is with ADG, is not here tonight, but he sent me a update, and I'll just kind of paraphrase some of this. The contractor began November 13th. We've had great weather, so we've made significant progress. Construction superintendent is forecasting 90% of the project to be completed by January 30th, barring the weather. We have made some minor adjustments to some of the fence alignment just because of the utilities or around the terminal building and stuff. Probably one of the more significant ones is we're pushing the fence line back away from Airport Road. We had some utilities and stuff, which won't give you that tunnel effect that I was concerned with. So that'll be nice. They've got a lot of holes drilled and a lot of posts up. I don't know, Lloyd, have they strung up any fence per se? They have, operating well out at the airport, so.
They're staying off the runway, we're doing good.
Yeah.
Actually, I've stopped out a few times to check on them, and my hat's off to, well, Rick, of course, has a very good interest in our airport and has been out there above and beyond what you'd expect somebody to be out there helping guide the project. And the other side is my hat's off to the guys from Land Plan, Todd and Brad, that are doing the surveying and engineering work out there. There were some issues on the east side of the terminal building where the fence was originally going to terminate right in the middle of a window. So it didn't divide up the air conditioner units and the utilities underground. And they managed to reconfigure that to, I think, a very more appealing alignment, and also a less intrusive alignment if they go to do maintenance and repair on those underground utilities and sewer lines and things. So my hat's off to both Land Plan and ADG for the effort that they put in to make this project a lot more aesthetic and keeping it going smoothly. So.
Yep.
Okay, anybody have other business?
I just have one more thing, and this came to me late, so I haven't had a chance to review it. It's going to be coming up, and if we're going to have a January meeting, we can discuss it further there. It's our 5-year ACIP that we need to get submitted. I believe that deadline's like February.
Okay.
Usually, not knowing our schedules, we're always late, and we kind of run this through. This year, ADG and myself have decided maybe we should try and get this to you guys earlier so we can actually look at it. So I think because I have not had a chance to look at it a lot, I think maybe it's better to, if we're gonna have a January meeting, we can just discuss it then, and go over those projects at that time.
Now, is this something, a document that you can forward or make public and we can have it ahead of time to
Yeah,
study before?
absolutely,
Okay.
yeah. I mean,
'Cause that's
basically, the gist of this pretty much is, we had next year in 2018, with the FAA, a project to rehabilitate some of the T-hanger taxi lanes, because of some of the grants that we've recently received from KDOT for the apron in front of on the west side and taxiway C. We have dried up the funds that the city has to match this FAA grant. So we're not gonna lose any of our appropriation. We'll just hold it and it'll move to the next year. So we just kind of shifted the projects out a year. Is basically the gist of it, but we can go back over that so you guys can see what's going on.
Okay. So, if, is there any other business that anybody has, or, I think with that in mind, we should pick a date in January to get together. If, I know Jeff, you've got a busy schedule. If you have your schedule in front of you with KU stuff. If possible, I'd like it to be maybe
needs to
Wednesday
be-
or Thursday.
For me, reasonably, it needs to be before January 12th.
Okay. What is the second Wednesday or Thursday of January?
The 10th is the second Wednesday of January.
Okay, is it open with KU activities for you?
I do not, I see women's basketball at 7, but I don't see a men's game.
There's no men's game that.
The men play on Tuesday night.
So how about, would Wednesday the 10th work for everyone?
Yes.
Okay, so why don't we set the Wednesday the 10th, and do we want that back out at the airport in the pilot's lounge at that time?
I am assuming so. Kurt mentioned that we may be asking more and more of our boards to
Be recorded?
be recorded.
And
So
online?
I'll check on that, but at this point, yeah, I would assume it would be at the airport.
Okay. And in talking with him, if we do need to have it in this room as well for recording, he said that it is available for us not to be as formal as we are now, that we can set up tables in the middle, kind of like we're used to, so it's a little more relaxed, more open. So,
Okay.
So tentatively, January 10th, 6:30 at the airport.
And it's not a closed meeting, just because it's at the airport, doesn't mean
Yeah.
y'all can't come and
No.
sit around the
Yeah.
periphery. It's
It's-
nice to have you come.
more input, the better. All right, so with that done, I adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All right.
Am I able to share this?